All right, so this is a really important check-in point. I'm going to ask you to do something here so that you can determine whether or not you're ready to move on to something much more difficult, okay? So what you're going to need to do is pause this video, go grab some paper and a pen or pencil, and grab your chapter summary handout that describes the operations of conversion, aversion, and contraposition. And when you have all of that, come back, restart your video. Okay, so we're getting ready to move on to something pretty difficult that is going to build on what we've been exploring in these last couple of lectures. And so you want to do kind of a check-in with yourself to make sure that you're kind of getting it with some simpler arguments before we move on to more complex ones. So here's an argument. All non-I are non-M. Some non-T are M, therefore some I are T. Now, this argument has too many terms to be considered standard form, and I'm going to ask you to do a few things for me here. One, I want you to use the operations of conversion, aversion, and contraposition to try to reduce down the number of terms of this argument to just 3. And I'm going to give you a hint. For one of these statements, you're going to have to use 2 operations in combination with one another, and the order in which you use those 2 operations is going to matter. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to reduce the number of terms down to 3, and then you're going to make sure that this argument is in standard form and all that that entails. Then you're going to determine whether or not this argument adheres to all 5 rules for standard form categorical syllogisms. Those 5 rules having to do with distribution and negative premises and so forth. Okay, and then finally, you're going to verify that the judgment you've made about the validity of this argument based on those 5 rules is reliable by determining the argument's form and consulting your inventory of valid forms. All right, so you want to pause your video, you want to do this work. It's a great opportunity for you to make sure you're ready to take the next kind of big step. When you've got your work done and you want to check it, go ahead and restart your video. All right, let's see how you did. So for this first premise, we're going to contrapose it, right? We're going to switch the positions of the subject and predicate terms and replace them both with their term complements. And when we do that, we're going to change all non-I or non-M to all M or I. And with that one operation, we just eliminated 2 of our nons. So then we move on to the second premise, and this one's going to be trickier. Okay, this one's going to be trickier because we're going to have to convert this premise and then obvert it. We can't obvert it and then convert it because we wouldn't fix the problem and we'd be breaking the rule of conversion by trying to convert an O claim, which we're not allowed to do. So if we convert this premise statement, some non-T or M, we're going to get the statement some M or non-T. And then when we obvert that, we're going to get the statement some M are not T. And now we've got our conclusion. And we can identify our distributed terms. And we've got 2 of them. We've got M is distributed in our first premise and T is distributed in our second premise. So now we apply the rules for categorical syllogisms. The middle term needs to be distributed at least once. M is our middle term. It's distributed in the first premise. Check that box off. We don't have anything distributed in the conclusion statement, so rule number 2 doesn't apply. We don't have 2 negative premises, so we're good with rule number 3. But rule number 4 is where we're going to run into a problem, right? Because we have here a negative premise and a affirmative conclusion. And we know that we cannot draw an affirmative conclusion from a negative premise. That violates rule number 4. And if that's right, we have an invalid argument. Now, we should check our work always, and an easy way to do that is by determining the argument's form. What's the argument's form? Did you say AOI in figure 3? Because if you did, you're wrong. If you chose that as this argument's form and you entered that in as a quiz, you'd get the question wrong. Why? Because the argument's not in standard form. T is our major term. It needs to appear in the first premise, and it's not. It's in the second premise. And I, which is the minor term, needs to appear in the second premise, and it doesn't. It's up here in the first. So in order to determine the form of this argument correctly, we're going to have to flip our premises, okay? And then once we do that, we say, aha, no, the argument's form is actually OAI in figure 3. And when we look at our unconditionally valid forms chart, we do not see that mood listed there. So the argument is invalid because it has an affirmative conclusion being drawn from a negative premise, a violation of rule number 4.